to the 12 Days of Innovation Summit. We have an excellent guest joining us today. James Nottingham is coming to us actually from England, which is very exciting, getting our international connection going here. And so to start off, rather than me stumbling through introducing James, would you introduce yourself, what you do with your company, and who you are?
Sure. Thank you very much, Taylor, for the invitation. And it's great to join with you middle of November and to see you having a Christmas hoodie on and the Christmas tree in the back. It's very fine indeed. I guess people would know, if anybody's heard of me, then they would have heard about the Learning Pit, and that's something that I created, and I know we're going to talk about that today. I started a company called Challenging Learning in 2006, and we've grown that now. We've got 30 employees in 6 countries, including the US, and I'm delighted that Dr. Carmen Bergman could join us today. She's our senior consultant in the US and Canada. I'm calling you from Alnwick in Northumberland. That is the most northeasterly county of England. We're on the Scottish border. You were telling me about the number of students you've got in your school district. We've got fewer people in our whole town, but we do have a castle, so that maybe is a claim to fame. The Duke of Northumberland sits here. Right now it's 8:45 p.m. as we're recording it, so the office is pretty quiet, as you can see. There's just me by myself, little sad man in the office, but I'm doing a webinar at 4 a.m. tomorrow morning for Australians, so it's who cares in these days about time zones.
That's right, and you win. You have a castle. That we do not. I definitely don't have a castle in our school district here. So that's excellent. Well, again, thank you for being here with us. And so, yes, the Learning Pit. That's where we do want to start. It's a concept, that I think some have heard of. Others, you say, hey, well, have you seen the Learning Pit? Do you understand what is that? So take us through that. What is the Learning Pit? How did you come up with it? And why is it so important for teachers to understand the Learning Pit?
Well, yeah, I created the Learning Pit with my students. I was teaching at the time in a middle school. I've taught 3 to 19-year-olds, but at the time I was in a middle school. And I wanted to encourage them to step out of their comfort zone. I saw that these students were hesitant to do so. They wanted to play it safe. They seemed to be fearful, shall we say, of getting it wrong, looking silly in front of their friends and so on. So I wanted to try to find a way that we could talk about learning, we could talk about being out of our comfort zone without them feeling bad about saying, I'm confused, I don't get it, I feel stupid. I wanted them to feel that sense of excitement, but also wobble when you're learning. So I tried lots of different things. I even got to the point of talking about this Russian guy called Vygotsky and zone of proximal development. And of course, my students were... So I had to think of a different way. And I tried lots of different things. And in the end, came up with the Learning Pit. And this was an idea that you get worse before you get better. That you start with a single idea, or you start with the basics of a skill. And as you explore further, it feels as if you get worse. And that can be really frustrating. It can be dispiriting. But I'm saying that's going through the Learning Pit. And we'll go through it together. We'll collaborate together. When we're in the Learning Pit, we'll learn how to think, we'll learn how to problem solve, we'll learn how to collaborate, we'll build resilience, we'll build self-efficacy, and in doing so, we'll learn how to come out of the pit. my students responded really well to it, and the idea of a pit seemed to speak to them. Maybe because it was a coal mining town, I don't know, but it wasn't. We're not talking coal pits, but I wanted the sense that this learning is uncomfortable. There's a giveaway in the term "step out of your comfort zone." I wanted to let them know this is going to feel uncomfortable, but that's okay. We're together on this. And the more we step out of the comfort zone, the more we will learn. And my students started using that phrase, "Oh, I'm in the learning pit." And then their parents would come in and say, "What the hell are you teaching these kids? They're talking about being in a pit. I'm trying to keep them out of the coal pit." And I'm saying, "No, it's not a coal pit, it's a learning pit," and what we're talking about. And then I started to share it with my colleagues, and then other people wanted to know about it, other schools, and then the BBC made a short film. They were trying to, what shall we say, find some good news in schools. At the time, late 90s, there was a lot of bad news in schools for lots of different reasons. And so the BBC commissioned a series of programs to find some good things. And there was a school orchestra in an inner city. There was some debating club, and then somebody somewhere, and I still to this day don't know who it was, pointed them in my direction. And they came to film for a day and a half in the school to make a 5-minute clip. Can you imagine the economics of that? But anyway, this was televised in 1999. You can find it on YouTube. It's aged really badly. There's a very young version of me, and I thought I was being really clever because I said, "I looked on the World Wide Web." I felt so clever about that. But anyway, you can find it if you want. Maybe save it for Halloween or something. But this was televised, and lots of people got interested and invited me to go and work in kindergartens, in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, in community groups, and it kind of built and built and built from there. I presented it at teacher conferences to say, this is what it looks like, this is what it can do. And then back in 2000, there was a lot of money from the European Union, kind of ironic these days, seeing as we're about to leave the Union. Nonetheless, there was a lot of money to try to improve circumstances for kids in high deprivation areas, of which this was one that I was teaching in. And a group of schools, they didn't have 24,000 students, but a few thousand anyway. They got a bunch of money, and they'd heard about me. They approached me and said, "Would you set up this social regeneration project to help raise aspirations and achievement for our young people?" And of course, I was delighted to accept that invitation. And 18 months later, they came to me and said, "This is the most successful project we've got on our books. We've got £1.6 million that we need to spend. Do you want to spend it?" Okay then. And so that was enough to employ lots of people to roll it out right across the northeast of England, and to look at ways to innovate in lots of different circumstances, in schools for students who have been kicked out so many times that they're in danger of going to prison, the youngest children, the community groups, and everything in between. And it kind of took off from there. And of course, you never know what's going to catch the zeitgeist, do you? You're never quite sure what's going to really interest people, but it seems to. And you do a search online these days, and 200 million references to the Learning Pit. It's extraordinary. It's weird, very weird, but very nice weird. And yeah, we've just received our first Japanese learning pit recently, so delighted with that. I can't pretend to read it, but we've seen it, and we do a lot of work in New Zealand, and indigenous people, the Maori people, they've created a Maori version of it as well. So yeah, it really is spreading around the world, and I'm delighted. One more thing to add to that before I stop on this point, Taylor, and that is the learning pit is not to be avoided. As I started working with Carmen in the US, we did come across educators in the US saying, oh, I thought it was something to avoid. And it's absolutely not. It's something to seek out. Seek out challenges. Look for ways to get your students into the learning pit so that they have the opportunity to practice problem solving, have the opportunity to figure things out, have the opportunity to collaborate together.
I think that I'm not trying to avoid the learning pit. Even with my own kids, it's when I learned about it and started seeing some of your TED Talks and videos, and looking into your website and things. It's something that is just, it's so great. And to know that and find out that you developed it with your students, that it was a trial and error, that you went into the pit with your students, that makes it that much more just practical, special. Very, very cool to be able to hear that story and how it came to be. And creating a means of communication, right? That a kid can come to you and say, I am in the depths of the pit right now. And that's not anything to be ashamed of, because everybody's going to go through it. And you're absolutely right that if you don't have that means of communication, if I come into work and say, I'm struggling right now, I could be looked down upon for that. And unless the proper structure is in place, like the learning pit. So that's why it's such a great tool. Why we're so glad that you're part of this year's conference. So my next question then is that, the learning pit's for the students, right? But what about the teachers? How does a teacher go through the learning pit? Or is there a way that they could, kind of throw themselves in? And we all learn things differently, but like you said, a lot of teachers, and essentially in the classroom, traditionally it's been about control. I control my classroom, I control my narrative, and I have all the answers in the answer book. But when it comes to throwing yourself in as a teacher that's leading students, how do you show that example of the learning pit to your students?
To start with, the best phrase is to say, I'm in the learning pit with you. To play, in effect, it's that Socratic approach, taking the lead from that old ancient Greek guy, Socrates. Don't drink the hemlock, but do think. Use the phrases, I'm wondering, I'm not sure, I don't understand this. Getting our students to talk through their ideas, to explain, to investigate. And when we remove ourselves as the all-knowing being, and we instead become the co-investigator, the co-experimenter, that's when it becomes really, really powerful. And I'm not suggesting we do this all the time. But the phrase, Taylor, I'm sure you've heard many people say it, you probably use it yourself, to teach is to learn twice. If we can get our students doing the teaching, and I don't mean, right, you go to the front of the class and you get on with it, but very much, and I'm sure you do this with your own kids, I certainly do, and I know Carmen does, is you say, what have you been learning at school? And they say, nothing. So you say, well, anything at all. And maybe they say, oh, we've been learning about gravity, or about rivers, or about odd numbers. And the next thing I say we should do is say, what's that all about? Remind me again what's that? Because then they start to tell you a little bit. And then you say, but how does that work, or how does that connect, or what's the relevance there? And we play that role of asking questions to get them to think more. Carmen took me to some schools. I mean, it feels like a lifetime ago, but this is before all this pandemic kicked off. I think it was February time, and in central Illinois. And we went to a couple of schools, and we went into a school, correct me if I'm wrong, Carmen, but with 4 and 5 year olds, and then to a class of 15, 16 year olds. And I used exactly the same approach. Particularly for the 15, 16 year olds, what are you learning? And they were in a science class. I mean, I don't know a thing about science. You know, I used to teach critical thinking. I used to teach geography when I taught in high school. I don't know anything about science. I was able to get them into the learning pit by not knowing anything, because I was questioning them, because I was asking them to make connections, because I was asking them, but how does that connect to what you were saying before? Able to say, is there another reason for that? Do you think that would always work? And using our questioning to give our students the time, the opportunity to think out loud, to work out. In fact, as one student said, how do you know what you think until you've thought it? And it's that idea of give them time to do that. I'm going to be making a presentation to Australians later tonight. And I'm going to be talking about dialogue. And I'm going to talk about the research from Mary Budd Rowe that found the average amount of time that we give students to think after we ask a question. The average amount of time between us asking a question and either somebody responding or us continuing to talk is 0.8 seconds. That's not a lot of time to think, is it? So this is about giving them that time. I'm also going to talk about Gad Yer's work, where he's found that teachers talk between 70 and 80% of the lesson time. That's extraordinary. You know, we need to give our students, they're the ones there to learn. So as teachers, it's really powerful to say, I don't know, I'm confused, I'm in the learning pit, let's work on this together. And using that very open Socratic way. And of course that works across the curriculum in whatever you're talking about. We adapt it for the age group. I'm going to be asking about different content with 6-year-olds than I am 16-year-olds, but it's still that same questioning approach. And it's still that idea, can I get them out of their comfort zone? Can I get them to have cognitive conflict where they think this, but they also think that, and that's in conflict with each other, so that they have to think more about it?
There are a lot of teachers that if you shared those statistics that they spend 80% of the time using their own voice, they would say, challenge accepted, I can do more. Because it's just so much so, like, especially on the secondary level. I taught middle school as well before moving into this role. And it does seem like that, you know, teaching is performance, it's art, but at the same time, the best teachers are the ones that step back and just let the students go and, you know, help facilitate with exactly what you're talking about there. So what have you seen as far as with the schools and the educators that you've been connected with? How has the response to the pandemic changed what teachers are doing and how you've seen it happen? You know, not only the struggles that teachers are going through, but ways that they have thrived, that they've grown, that they've found their way out of the pit.
Yeah, I would say there's 3 main, shall we say, reasons to be in the learning pit. The first reason is what you've described there, Taylor, and it's our circumstance. We find ourselves in there. The whole flaming world is in a learning pit just now. And we found ourselves there, and it's troubling, and it's uncomfortable, and it's causing a lot of grief in many ways. So first one is we find ourselves there. Second one, though, is we purposefully take our students, take our colleagues into the learning pit when we can, to help them develop strategies for being in the pit, help them develop resilience, self-efficacy, problem-solving skills, creativity, innovation, give them that opportunity to develop that. And then the third reason is people choosing to be there because they think that's where I learn most. I get a kick out of that. It's a bit like exercise, I suppose. Sometimes you're forced to exercise and you really don't want to exercise, but as you get into it more and more and more, you get hooked on it. And that's what I'm talking about here. And I know that a lot of teachers are getting in touch with me saying, I wish we'd taken our kids into the learning pit way more beforehand, because then they would have been able to cope with this lockdown better. We had lockdown, we found out my own kids, we've got 3 kids and 2 of them are in elementary school. And oh my goodness, I tell you what, I'm thinking, just for 5 minutes, learn by yourself, will you? You don't have to have your hand held all the time. You know, and our teenager is smiling wryly that, yes, I can do it all by myself. And what came out of that 4 months of sheer hell of I'd much rather teach 100 kids in school than teach 2 of my own children at home, you know. And I mean, my son kept saying, can I go out for my PE lesson now, Dad? Which basically meant, can I just leave the room and play outside? Imagine, though, if we had, during normal times, built that resilience, built that independence, built that curiosity, taught them how to be less dependent upon us. I think so many students are so used to waiting on the teacher's every word, or pretending to wait on the teacher's every word, but doing what the teacher tells them to do, rather than going and investigating themselves. So, of course, it's that phrase that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And so let's get on with that. And that's what we've been talking about in our team. And that's what we've been talking about with all of the schools that we work with. Of course, mostly it's been online in the last 7 or 8 months, but you can be in the learning pit online as much as you can be face-to-face in the learning pit. I had shall we say, a troubled upbringing. And some people might say that the last thing I needed to do was go into the learning pit when I was at school, because I spent so much of my life outside of school in the learning pit for lots and lots of different reasons. You know, those were the lessons that I forgot all the stuff outside, when I had something really to grapple with, to think about, to problem solve. And kids love computer games, they love chess, they love athletics, they love whatever it is that they're into. Why? Because it's an escape. And the learning pit can be an escape for the students. So even if you're thinking to yourselves, my students have gone through a lot of grief in the last 6, 7, 8 months. They're dealing with a lot going on. There's been a lot of political and social unrest in your country, right, in the last few months, particularly. How are they dealing with that? My response would be, encourage them into the pit. It's as Robert Bjork from University of California said, create desirable difficulties. And I love the alliteration there. That's what I'm talking about. Create desirable difficulties. If we can create those desirable difficulties to take our students into the learning pit, you know what? That's going to give them that opportunity for two things. One, forget about the difficulties that have been thrust upon us without our choice. And second of all, it's giving them the opportunity to learn how to face difficulties, how to think about them, how to be creative. I'm a big fan of etymology and looking at the root meanings for words, and critical, as in critical thinking, comes from the ancient Greek, and originally it meant able to make judgments. And this is about getting them into the learning pit, giving them strategies, giving them tools, giving them encouragement, giving them the opportunity to develop their judgment-making skills. And then, of course, what we do over time is help them to make those judgments wise judgments by comparing previous experiences and thinking about what might happen and so on. So it's not perfect. There is no silver bullet in education. We can't find the perfect. If we did, we wouldn't need any of this. We don't need 12 days of Christmas. You just need one day. Just do the thing and get on with it. You know, there isn't a silver bullet, but it works really beautifully. If you think about it, use it, take that positive approach of we're getting into the learning pit together to learn how to innovate and how to problem solve.
So I want to shift gears a little bit, because not only outside of the learning pit, you've got, like I said, a lot of other books, and one on challenge mindset. You know, growth mindset is one of those teacher words that just, it's kind of all over the place, and no one ever mentions like, well, what is that? It's just there. And so, but your challenge mindset is kind of interconnected with that. Can you just talk briefly about that? How challenge mindset and growth mindset work together, how they are different, and just your thoughts behind that.
Well, I have to be honest. First of all, nail my colours to the mast. I'm a very, very, very big fan of Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset. She and I have been on tour together many, many times. Growth mindset is very powerful indeed. It has a somewhat mixed reputation just now for many reasons. One is it's that implementation issue, that we take an idea, and we're very, very good at that. We're magpies in education. We pick up all these ideas and think, that's brilliant, I'll take it into the classroom. But it's not enough to put a poster up. It's a start, but it's not enough. It's like the learning pit. It's not enough just to put a poster on the wall and say, there you go, there's the learning pit. We have to think it, we have to talk about it, we have to live it, we have to breathe it. And there's been a lot of problems with that oversimplification. It's happened to so many things. Assessment for learning, that's been oversimplified. Visible learning, that's been oversimplified. Growth mindset is another victim of oversimplification. People have boiled it down to put effort in, try harder. In fact, I was working with the biggest international school in the Middle East, and I was taking a walk around this school, and I was asking the students, what helps you to learn? And some of the kids went, ugh, growth mindset. I said, well, that doesn't sound very positive. No, we hate it. I said, okay, why? And they said, every time we get something wrong, the teachers blame our mindset and say that it was because of our mindset that we failed. They never blame their teaching, they always blame our mindset. And then, of course, one kid piped up, oh yeah, and we've also got this thing called the hole of pain. The teachers call it the learning pit, but we call it the hole of pain. So the implementation is always an issue. That's one. Second thing, the effect size is low. And because of John Hattie particularly, but many other researchers as well, educators these days, we're much more familiar with effect sizes. We've learned that a 0.4 effect size on the Cohen's efficient is 0.4 is the average. More than 0.4 is a good result. Less than 0.4 is less than average. And effect size is in the region. The first meta-analysis had it at 0.21. The second had it at 0.11. really disappointing. But, and this is what people don't often say, is the vast majority of the studies included in those meta-analyses were based on the 1 hour intervention from Stanford University. So let's get this right. In just 1 hour online, you can have an effect size between 0.1 and 0.2. That's something like 3 months to 6 months additional progress in 1 hour. Who's not going to take that? Who is not going to take that? So the link between Challenging Mindset, my book, and Growth Mindset and everything I do is my company is called Challenging Learning. My books always have challenge in there somewhere. So Challenging Mindset is about challenging the notions, challenging the preconceptions, challenging the implementation, and trying to say to people, being honest and say, look, this is why it won't work. This is what you can do to make it work. You see, I don't know your school district at all, Taylor, but if you have got schools that are performance oriented, if it's all about the grades, it's all about winning, it's all about beating other people, it's all about getting the GPA, it's all about being better than the neighboring school. If that's what your focus is, you know what? Growth mindset's not going to help you. In fact, I wouldn't take it because it conflicts. Growth mindset conflicts with that performance focus. If, however, you've got a learning focus, and a learning focus is how much can we learn? How much progress can we make in this space of time? How can we support each other? How can we share our best practice from our school with other schools? That then means growth mindset will work brilliantly for you. And to be honest, growth mindset's probably going in your school, even if you don't call it growth mindset. But here's the other circumstance. If you think we are too performance focused, we're too focused on grades, and grades are important, but the problem is if we only focus on grades, then you know fine well what students do. They'll say, sir, is this on the test? If it ain't on the test, they ain't listening. Or they think, I've aced that test, I don't need to do more. That's a performance focus. I'm home and dry. Whereas a learning focus is, I always want to improve, I always want to get better. Performance focused school is they jealously guard their success. They keep the secrets to themselves because they think we have to be better than everyone else. Learning focused school is we share our innovation and our best practice, because you know what, we're all in education here, and if we can help grow the expertise of everybody in our community, everybody benefits. So here's the other circumstance. Let's say you think we are too performance oriented, we want to become more learning oriented, then growth mindset can be the vehicle to help you move from one to the other. But know this is going to be a challenge. You're going to go through the learning pit. You're going to, it's going to be gritty. You're going to find problems. There's going to be people saying, yeah, but grades, it's all about the grades, and we're going to be measured by grades. And I'm saying, yeah, but of course we are. But when did you ever think that more learning wouldn't lead to better grades? And so mindset is superb, but as with all the other things I've mentioned, assessment for learning and visible learning and so on, it's seriously complex, and we have to give it time, we have to give it oxygen, we have to work together to identify the best ways forward.
You know, going from performance-based to learning-based and everything between that you just said, there was a TED Talk that you did, I think almost 8 years ago, where you're talking about labels and the dangers of labels in education and how labels can limit learning. So then, I mean, what would you say to a principal who is performance-based?
I would say in pretty much every circumstance is innovate at the edges. don't play around with your core, right? Because if you start breaking down the core, you're going to have an awful lot of very upset people, and they're not going to know which way to go. I think leadership is about innovating at the edges, finding what works for you in your community, and then starting to feed that in to the core. You see, one of the things that I always find a little bit weird is when schools will send, I mean, in the old days where we used to send people to conferences, I know what these days you go online, but they would send a few colleagues off to a conference. And then when they came back, there was the expectation that they would share the ideas with everyone in the school or in the faculty. I think that's a crazy idea, absolutely crazy. We're missing a step in the middle, and that is, by all means, go and find out. Come back and try it out. Innovate at the edges. Try it with a cohort or willing group or one or two of the classes. Try it out and collect your evidence. Does it work for you? Does it work for your community? If so, then how are we going to drive this through the whole school? But if not, well, okay, it didn't work for us. And if you're really determined, why didn't it work for us? And we get in touch with people and say, come and help us here. Come and help us with mindset, or come and help us with feedback, or come and help us with dialogue, or whatever it is. Come and help us to understand, but always innovate at the edges. So when this lockdown happened, our core purpose is long-term work with schools and school districts. We typically work with them for multiple years, 2, 3, 4 years sometimes, and we have massive gains. When this lockdown happened, there was, shall we say, a temptation to say, well, we can't do that anymore. So what we need to do now is do everything online. And we started to innovate online, of course. And I think we're doing a really good job now with webinars and book studies and so on, and lots of really nice innovation. But we caught ourselves a couple of months in to lockdown and said, let's not forget our core purpose. Let's not get rid of the thing that we know works brilliantly. Okay, so we can't get into classrooms in the US, in the UK right now, but we can in Scandinavia. We can in Australia because they're open, and we've got employees in those areas of the world. So we can continue with our core purpose, but what we'll do is innovate at the edges. And that, to me, is always the best way to go. And it's helped us in our business, helped us in school districts, it's helped us in our schools. Yeah, never, ever go wholesale right at the beginning. You've got to prove it to yourself that it's going to work for your community.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you, James, for sharing that with us. You've mentioned throughout our conversation what your company does, but would you like to take a second and just explain out what you all do obviously around the world with Carmen here in the US, but I know you've got people all over the world. So what is it that your company does in supporting schools?
So the title "Challenging Learning," that was a deliberate way to say this is who we are and this is what we stand for, and it's meant to be a double meaning. On the one hand, we make learning more challenging, and I think some of the answers I've given you today, Taylor, will give you some insight into that. But also, not only do we want to make learning more challenging, we want to challenge the way learning takes place. And so what we do is we look for the research, we look for the evidence that might just stir people's minds a bit, might just get them wobbling a bit, might get them thinking, oh, really? And then we look at, so what can we do about that? So a classic one is feedback. And we've got a book, Challenging Learning Through Feedback. We do a lot with schools. Feedback is one of those massively powerful influences on student learning. That's well rehearsed. We know that, everybody knows that. But What a lot of people don't know is it's also one of the most variable. Most factors are there or thereabouts. Feedback is a massive variable from 0.15 all the way to 1.2. It's extraordinary. 80% of verbal feedback that students get during the day comes from other students, and most of it is wrong. Oops. 1/3 of feedback has a negative outcome. In other words, 1/3 of the time, it would be better if we shut up. Now, those are classic research findings that stir us because we think, well, we didn't know that. And so what are we going to do about it? And so we investigate it. We innovate at the edges. We look for ways to make it better. We look for ways to improve practice in classrooms, and we try it and we try it and we try it. We build a repertoire, and then we introduce it to the world. We introduce it into our consultancy. So we do that with all of them. We've talked about mindset before. Challenge is a classic one, that when you give students choice, typical effect drops from 0.4 to 0.04. Why? Because most of the time students pick the activity that they think they'll be best at. They'll pick the thing they know they can do. And so performance and learning drops significantly. So does that mean we should stop giving choice? Or does it mean we build a culture where challenge is not only acceptable, but desirable, that we seek to step out of our comfort zone? We're excited by challenge. So we build that culture, and then we give them choice, and the students choose to step out of their comfort zone. So this is what we're doing. We look for research that's really going to stir it up a bit, is going to inspire, and then we give people the ways to do it. So we do keynotes, we do one-day workshops, we do book studies. By far our most powerful one is, as I say, this long-term process, because of course it's one thing to talk about feedback, it's another thing to make it really work, not just at the edges, but right at the core. You know, if we say to high school teachers, the best time to give feedback is before your students finish, a lot of them go, oh, that's cheating, you can't do that. So we have to hold their hands and have to show the evidence and show the practice and show them it working, and let them see the gains that the students are going to make and show that it's not cheating. The same with the learning pit. So we will do demonstration lessons. I mean, that's why Carmen took me to those schools. Now give me any group of students and I'll work with them and I'll show you it, show the learning pit in action. So I mean, the thing is, we all want to do better. We all want to improve. And that's not saying we've got a deficit model where we're not doing good already. We're already doing well. Your country does brilliantly. You have got some of the best practice in the world. However, you've also got this huge long tail of underachievement. Your variability is astonishing. You've got world class, and then you've got everything in between. Whereas Finland, and Finland has that reputation for being brilliant, they don't have practice like you have. Their practice is nowhere close to your brilliant practice, but they don't have the drop-off either. So you're there to there, and they're there. They're just generally really good. Nobody's falling through the gap at all. Everybody's succeeding, but there's no one succeeding the way that they succeed in the USA. So it's about how can we work together, and we might be working in a very, very successful district and the very next day working in a district that's really struggling. And so it takes a different approach. And that's the beauty of this job, beauty of education.
Well, thank you, James, for being a part of this year's 12 Days of Innovation. We're so glad that you were able to stay at the office a little later. I know it's a little lonely there, but we really appreciate your time.
You're very, very welcome. And if I'd known, I would have brought my Christmas jumper as well. It's even got a light up nose, but don't worry. Next time.
Next time for sure. Awesome. All right.